today's webinar. We are talking about the new thinking for contact center KPIs, which is such an interesting topic. And again, without further ado, I'm going to reintroduce our panel. Katie Stabler from Cultivate. Hello again, Katie.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here today.
Oh, it's great to have you on board again for another one of our webinars. Obviously, you and I have spoken frequently this year on many different topics, many different events. But today we're talking all about KPIs, which again is a topic you're so well suited to discussing with our audience.
Yeah, and it's such a good time to revisit it because obviously so much is changing so very quickly. So KPIs have to be one of those things that are brought into that change.
Oh, 100%. It's so important to keep up to date as well of what we could be doing, what other contact centers are doing. And I think,
Totally.
again, that's where Kevin comes in really nicely. So, Kevin McNulty, you're also joining us from TalkDesk. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Xander, and really excited to be here as well, and excited to participate in this conversation. It's going to be great.
100%. I think you're going to bring a really interesting perspective as well, right? From a not only what you've seen in your career and what you're seeing from TalkDesk customers now, but it's also taking that sort of futuristic approach to it, right? That's the new thinking element of this.
Yeah, I think so. I do believe we're on the cusp of some, really fundamental changes and frankly, how work across the board is done. And, we'll talk a little bit how it impacts the contact center and customer experience departments and service departments.
100%. And then rounding out our panel for today is me, Dan Freeman. I'm a digital content director here at Call Center Helper. So, quick bit of housekeeping just to begin with. Again, it's not going to be unheard of for those of you who are familiar with Call Center Helper webinars. We do love an interactive webinar. Please do get involved. You can do so by clicking on the chat icon at the bottom. Again, as always, replay slides will be available later this afternoon. And we do like to bribe our audience as well. So there is a gift card available for the best tip coming in. So please do get involved. We've got two absolute industry experts on side today to answer any of your questions about KPIs and how we're sort of evolving going forward in our contact centers. So please do get involved either with a question or a tip. You can do so by typing in hashtag question or hashtag tip into the chat. And again, there is a gift card available for the best tip as always. So without further ado, I'm going to move on in our agenda. Katie, you're up first. But before you do so, we have a quick poll to launch to our audience. So let me quickly launch that. There we go. You should all be seeing it now. Has your organization fallen victim to any of the following toxic KPI behaviors? So having contradictions between actual performance and your numbers, chasing numbers without really knowing why, using KPIs as targets and not indicators, tracking KPIs that don't inform decision making, or finally, having a set of KPIs that are imbalanced. It's multiple choice. Feel free to answer as many of these as possible. Katie, what do you expect to see?
Oh, can people pick all of them? Because I
Yeah.
think I think there's got to be even small examples of all of these in most companies. But I think that top one, it screams out to me. It's like it's the watermelon effect, where actually, all the KPIs might be tracking tick, 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 green, but inside the customer experience is red, and there is something that is not quite aligning there.
To be fair, it's almost like you knew what was going to come up in this poll. Yeah, allowing people to select multiple options here. It's pretty evenly split across the board. Let me quickly end that and share the results. Yep, lots of voting from the audience, lots of
Yeah.
discussion there. Yeah, I think you're right. I think anyone, if they think hard enough in their content center career, could easily pick any of these. So I tell you what, that sets us up really nicely then for your presentation. If you want to take control, share your slide deck and take us away.
Yes, let's get the technical bit out of the way. Deep breath, success, great, woohoo. So, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Katie Stabler, for those who don't know me, founder of Cultivate. I've worked in customer experience for the last decade, and I think this is an incredibly interesting, ever-evolving topic. So without further ado, let's dig in. So once upon a time, in a land of endless ringing phones, beeping chats, blinking status lights, and dashboards glowing red, there sat a weary little call centre. Every day, the people who lived there, the kind-hearted agents and the team leaders with clipboards, worked tirelessly to answer questions, calm tempers, and solve mysteries. But no matter how hard they worked, the kingdom was never quite satisfied. You see, the kingdom, everything was measured. How fast did you answer? How short was your call? How many people did you speak to today? The rulers loved numbers, and there existed no other kingdom in the land where very much was measured. So, The call center folk did what they had to do. They rushed through calls, they had multiple live chats on the go, they fired off emails, stuck to scripts, and kept one eye on the ticking clock. But the villagers, the customers, grew sadder and angrier. And the helpers in the call center, well, they grew tired, so very tired. Until one day, a brave call center dweller asked a dangerous question. What if we measured things differently? What if we cared more about how people felt and less about how fast they hung up? And that, dear listeners, is where our story really begins. So why? Why are we talking about the new thinking for contact center KPIs? Why is this needed? I'm not going to talk about all of the very well-known KPIs here because, well, they're well-known. You know, AHT, FCR, we've mentioned them in the poll already. They've been around for a long time. And look, they mostly have some value. You know, I'm not going to tell you that they all need to be picked up and chucked in the bin and you need to start afresh, because you don't. But despite the common KPIs often having value, something is wrong. I bet you all enjoy reading the UK and the American Customer Satisfaction Index as much as I do every night. But if you do read it on a night, it is quite the customer experience horror story. Customer satisfaction across the globe, it's just at a continual low, and it's declining. And although the US did see a slight upturn from 2022 this year, it has resumed back to normality in the most recent update and is back on the decline. And the UK, well, it's a similar story. It's sitting pretty low and stagnant. And this, according to the UK Customer Satisfaction Index, is costing companies on a whole over 7 billion per month. These customer satisfaction service failures, over 7 billion per month, which is crazy and it can't be ignored. So let's, before we dig into the KPI part, just have a quick look at what are the biggest satisfaction detractors are from customers. What are they reported to be? So first up, customers' problems are not resolved effectively or quickly enough. So the research shows us that customers are becoming increasingly frustrated when issues aren't resolved first time, when they need to chase multiple times for a solution, and when their complaints are handled poorly. And whilst wait times are still a factor, now it's not just about how long a customer waits, but it's how they experience the wait, how they feel during that wait. Then we've got lack of empathy and personalization. Now, empathy, it feels like this buzzword, right? You know, it's always thrown around. Yet, despite how much we talk about it, we seem to consistently lack the ability to harness it and harness its benefits. And customers state that interactions that feel robotic, scripted, or indifferent lead to low satisfaction. Customers want to feel heard and want to feel valued, not just processed, not just feel like a number. And interestingly, Sam Altman, if you listen to his interview with Adam Grant, the workplace psychologist, I think it's available on a TED Talk and it's well worth a listen if you haven't. But Sam has a really interesting take on AI and empathy. So he thinks that we as humans are pretty consistently terrible at empathy because we are narcissistic and we turn conversations inwards on ourselves, which is so true. We always revert back to our experiences. It's where we are in our comfort zones. And he thinks AI can do empathy better. Not because AI is empathetic, we haven't got there yet, but because AI can actually deliver empathetic traits, such as curiosity. It can ask questions. It can maintain focus, unlike ourselves, and it can show patience. So interesting. And then finally, on the detractor point, we have inaccessible or ineffective digital channels. So customers are increasingly frustrated at poorly functioning self-service options or the need to channel hop. And customers are also frustrated when there's an inconsistent channel experience. So, if wait times, handling times, first-time fixes, and inconsistencies are still problems in the eyes of our customers, in the eyes of customer service, then what value is really being driven from the KPIs that we do and have historically used to measure each of these areas? Undoubtedly, there are importance to these measures. What they measure are customer experience impactors. The researcher shows us, the detractors that I've just gone through show us that. These are things that customers do care about, but the current measures, the current KPIs, don't seem to be proficiently delivering a consistently good customer experience. So we have to question the value and how we do things. So when it comes to the new way of thinking about contact center KPIs, I actually have two takeaways that I want to share from this presentation. The first one I'm going to go through is how we use data and insight, including KPIs. And then I will go through some alternative KPIs which can better drive performance in a way that matters most to your customers and will ultimately benefit your business. But first, customer data, or customer insight to be specific. When I ask you where you can get customer data from, what would you answer? I bet you'd answer feedback surveys, maybe user data, like how a customer interacts with your products and service and website and socials, voice of the process, maybe some of you do some customer journey mapping, voice of the employee as well, social listening, review sites, conversational analytics, and of course, KPIs. That list could go on and on and on. You could get loads of different data points for customer insight. Now, companies tend to be pretty good at collecting data. Some are good at turning that data into insight, but few are good at acting on that insight. And even less are good at looking at all of those data sources together and creating a really robust and holistic understanding of your customer experience. And the problem is we all work in silos. Bob owns VOC, Sarah looks after the socials, and Asan looks after the contact center KPIs. It's all in silos. And only 17% of companies have fully integrated customer data throughout the entire organization. And that such tiny percentage of collective data use leads to erroneous decision-making based on flawed insights. And if we aren't looking at and using robust customer insight, then no wonder customer service seems to be underperforming. KPIs alone are just indicators. We talked about it in that toxic poll. Indicators alone, they don't show the full story. And so KPIs need to be used alongside all of your other data points to ensure that you are seeing the full picture. What and what isn't important, where and where not to focus, what and what not to prioritize. And when you do break down these data silos, then you can understand which of your KPIs are actually driving value and which might benefit from evolving. So to go through the final part of this presentation, I'm going to go through each of those customer pain points and some of the alternative KPIs that can help you to monitor and hopefully eradicate those pain points. So first up, we had problems not being resolved effectively or quickly enough from the customer's perspective. So we currently use, or most oftenly use, FCR here. And it may fail you because just like that toxic KPI poll indicated, it's often measured inaccurately or not from the customer's perspective. So instead, we can try customer perceived resolution resolved rate. And this is actually a KPI which is coming direct from your customer's perspective, direct from the horse's mouth, as it were. This is where you would look at a percentage of your customers who say that their issue was fully resolved. So not that we think it was, but that the customers are telling us that it was. Then we've got lack of empathy and personalization. So here, when we are measuring things like how long a customer is in their interaction, that's incentivizing the wrong behavior. It's incentivizing speed over quality, and it's rushing the human connection. And okay, sometimes we want quick, simple fixes, but actually human connection on digital channels is still incredibly important. And instead, we can look at different KPIs here, which can drive the right behavior. So, for example, a quality of interaction score. So in this case, it can assess things like agent empathy, it can assess active listening, it can assess tone of voice, it can also assess AI supported interactions, and this can all be scored via your QA, whether that's human QA or AI supported QA. Then, when it comes to a perceived lack of transparency, call volume or script adherence can really influence a poor experience here, because ultimately it's focusing on process and not trust. And once upon a time, process was brought into the workplace because we wanted to make sure that the customer experience was always consistent and fit for purpose. So we built a process and we put it in place to make sure that happened. And over time, the process actually became more important than the customer experience, and everything became focused on process, and customer kind of fell away into the background. And actually, we need to remember what processes are there for. They're there to support the customer experience. They're not the primary, they're not the be all and end all. So we need to stop the focus entirely on process and bring it back to trust, which is why here we could look at a trust score instead. And this can be done via your existing customer satisfaction score, so your CSAT, or your Net Promoter Score, your NPS. And you can follow up those survey questions with questions like, do you trust this company to do the right thing for you? Now, interestingly, when I mentioned about the UK and the US Customer Satisfaction Index earlier, what struck me as sad, if I'm honest, was that one of the biggest satisfaction improvers across the board, across industries, across the globe, is trust. Now, the reason that I felt sad to me is because as a customer, it feels like the minimal thing that you should have is trust for the company that you're interacting with. But actually, as consumers as a whole, our trust is lacking. And if you can improve the trust that your customer has in you, you'll go a long way quickly to improving customer satisfaction. So trust should be one of the things that you are measuring, because it's one of the biggest customer experience influencers. When it comes to inaccessible or ineffective digital channels, we use things like containment rates as a measure. The thing is, this measures deflection, not whether the actual issue was resolved. So again, an alternative can be that you can try digital resolution rate plus customer effort score combined, and this can identify how accessible and how effective your channels feel. And again, I kind of have to go back to the point around using data collectively here, because this measures almost on a surface level. And often what we think our customer experience looks like and what the reality of our customer experience is differs. And a great way to eradicate that difference of view and make sure you do truly understand your customer experience is to bring in methodologies like customer journey mapping. Because on the surface, we might think that we're perfectly accessible, we have brilliantly effective channels, and actually in the background, customers just do not feel that, and the data doesn't always show that through usage. So always take that outside in perspective as well. And then the last two, experience detractor points. Inconsistent experience across channels. This has got to be a common one, right? I mean, you as a consumer, think about this yourself. The last time you interacted with a company and had to go through different channels. This can be measured by channel shift rate, but it doesn't tell you about the pain points of customers repeating information or poor handoffs. I'm currently going through over a month-long dispute with an online shopping company and an online payment company. And I cannot tell you the amount of times I'm utilizing their Facebook Messenger chat options, and every single time you have to start by telling them who you are and what your problem was and what's happened to date. And no matter how many times I ask, please, can you just read the last notes? No, they cannot. It is painful. So think about like yourselves. The thing is with these measures at the moment, they don't show that pain. They can't give you that feeling. You don't know what a poor handoff looks like. So instead, you can use something like an omni-channel continuity score. That's a mouthful. And this is derived from customer survey questions and AI insight, like conversational analytics. So you're getting direct customer feedback. And then finally, wait times and availability. So we mentioned this at the beginning. Speed to answer at the moment is obviously a very common measure that we use, and one that seems to be causing some pain points for a few of you by the looks of it. But it doesn't reflect the experience of the wait time. And really interestingly, experience of the wait time is something that's incredibly important to customers at the moment. Again, I'll give you another personal example to Sam Altman's point, narcissistic conversation. But I recently contacted an online chat. They told me an advisor would be with me shortly. What does shortly mean? And I was waiting and I was waiting and I was waiting. And the chat gave no indication as to how long I would need to wait before an agent would finally be in contact with me. And it's such a minor thing to be able just to give your customer the idea, that expectation of time. It would have been such an effective enhancement of the customer experience. But instead, my waiting experience was severely impacted by the fact that I didn't know how long I was going to have to wait. So experience of the wait time is becoming more and more important to customers. So instead of speed to answer, use a wait experience score. Ask them, what was the experience of your wait and what could we do to do things better? And so, little by little, the weary call center began to change. They stopped chasing seconds and started chasing smiles. They listened to what employees and customers really needed and not just what fit into their script. They swapped stopwatches for storybooks, dashboards for conversations, and AI came along to strengthen that human connection, not just replace it. The end. So if we're not already connected, please go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen to connect with me. I'm always happy to chat. And for those South Africa people, make sure you get in touch. And as a special offer to all of you today, I have just recently published a new book all on the culture of customer experience, and a special call center helper discount is available for the next 24 hours if anybody would like to take up that offer. The link can be found in the QR code. So for now, happy CXing, and I'm always happy to take any questions.
Katie, thank you so much for that. As someone who has been this is what happens when I don't talk for a bit. As someone who has read your book, it is honestly, it's such a good read. It's worth picking up. So yeah, thank you so much for offering that code as well too.
Very welcome.
Right, let me take over presenting duties again. Here we go. So many different takeaways from there, Katie. You know what, actually, there's a few different routes I could go with this, but I saw a lot of questions, a lot of tips in the audience. Also, a lot of love for the presenting style as well, which is always nice to hear. The storytelling seemed to resonate nicely with our audience.
Good.
So that's always nice. So I'll tell you what, let's crack through with some of these questions. How are you suggesting we collect data for this new KPI? Asked by Alberto. Alberto, are you okay to pop in the chat which KPI you're talking about there specifically?
Yeah, because if you're meaning as a whole, I think, you know, we collect data already, don't we? This is the thing. We collect so much data. We are normally not short as companies of data. And when they're brought together, we might be lucky that it's once a month in a boardroom, in a report where we actually, as maybe head seniors, we talk about it together. But then that's it. Then we all go off to our own departments. We have our own priorities. We focus on our data and our insight. And again, it doesn't come together until the next month. And what a waste. What a waste. We are not looking at the robust view of CX, of the customer experience, if we are looking at data in that way. So no matter how good your KPIs are, how accurate they are, you're missing a huge trick if you're not aligning your KPIs with all of the other insight on customers that you collect.
100%. And I think, Kevin, this might be a good time to bring you into the conversation a little bit without giving anything away from your presentation that is coming up in a few minutes. Obviously, there's a huge amount we could do with the current platforms that we use from a CCAS perspective, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, collecting some of this data, you talk a lot about empathy, Katie, and the ability to measure that and the need for, these more empathetic relationships. What we're seeing is a lot of, emotional analysis now being brought into QA activities, into ways of tracking. So again, people aren't using surveys anymore, but they're able through, interaction analysis, be able to understand, what was the person's emotion when they began a call
Mm.
to what happened over the course of that, how it changed, and being able to measure that change in emotion, whether someone, started grateful and happy and ended frustrated, that's very different than someone being frustrated the whole time, or someone starting frustrated and again ending and feeling that their problem was resolved and being happy. It really can help in terms of how you're measuring the effectiveness of your program versus, as Katie mentioned, just speed.
100%. And I think, to be fair, as much as we can talk about how AI has come on leaps and bounds, sentiment analysis alone, as a sort of subsection of that, is just so fascinating to see where we were and where we are now, what is capable within that in real time as well. It is, selfishly, from my side, one of the really fascinating things that I'm seeing at the moment within contact centers. Here's another question from Mark. It is interesting that that as we talk about lack of empathy, we are moving more and more to AI. How does one answer the empathy question while pushing the AI option? I'll tell you what, Mark, I'm going to put a pin in that question. Kevin, I know there is stuff coming up in your presentation that will fit in really nicely here. So I'm going to leave that, Mark. I promise your question will be answered within the next 33 minutes, providing that Kevin sticks to time. So we will circle back to that one. Let's quickly go through some of these tips. This one in from Greta. KPIs shouldn't just measure contact center performance in isolation. All departments need to understand their role in CX and align their KPIs accordingly. A solid approach can mask root issues and lead to disconnected service delivery. Katie, so true, right?
I love that. Yeah. And that completely hits the nail on the head of my book, because it's all about, as you just said, what was her name? Sorry, Sander?
Greta.
Great. Yeah, you're exactly right. Customer experience, it isn't just for the contact center, it isn't just for frontline, it isn't just for agents. It absolutely has to infiltrate the entire organization, because it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, ultimately, what you do does have an impact on the end customer experience. And it's got to be that team effort, it's got to be that culture.
100%. And I think the time is right to make that push as well for the wider organization. So many companies want to get involved in what's going on at the moment. Contact centers are the perfect way to do that. Showcase your data, elevate it to the wider business, and if nothing else, it just puts more importance on exactly what contact center professionals are doing at the moment. 100%.
Yeah, 100%. Good. Great tip.
Excellent tip, Greta. Here's one from Desmond. Measure your actual performance now and then set your KPIs accordingly in increments until you reach your achievements. How do you eat one bite at a time? That, I didn't think I'd see that in today's webinar, but well done, Desmond. You've made me laugh. That is
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, a bit of marginal gains there, absolutely. Just every percent counts. Small steps, don't boil the ocean. Can we fit any more metaphors in here?
Metaphors, maybe not. But there you go. If you don't want to use the phrase marginal gains, eat an elephant works just as well. Here's one from Bali. If the focus is based on customer perspectives, focus on the feedback given from clients, especially when it's a customer who returns for an open problem or new. Your tools need to allow your agents to be able to see what made your customer unhappy on the previous conversation to ensure it's resolved or not repeated on the next visit. Katie, this links into exactly what you were talking about, right? About disconnection across channels.
Yeah, totally. I mean, but isn't it sad that we're still talking about this? This is not a new problem. We've been experiencing this for a long time, and I'm sure that significant improvement, is on the cusp. Things are going to change, but it is super frustrating that this still happens. My example I gave, it is literally a month of transcripts, a month of chat transcripts with countless times of me saying the same thing to people, and it is so frustrating. So yeah, you have to empower your agents with the right tools for them to be able to do a good job.
100%.
Yeah,
No agent wants to go into work today and do a bad job. There, it's
and be
about empowering
blind.
and
Yeah.
setting them up to succeed, right? And Kevin, again, not that these questions are setting us up perfectly, but they sort of are for your presentation. So I tell you what, let's fit in two quick more tips before we get to your presentation, Kevin, and then you will answer quite a few more as we go through, I'm certain,
Sounds
right?
great. Sounds excellent.
So here's one in from Charlie. Focusing on first contact resolution will only please customers, but can actually drive efficiency in the contact center. Less back and forth with the customer by getting it right first time. Kevin, anything to add on this one?
No, I think this is spot on. I mean, I do think first contact resolution is still an important metric. I agree it shouldn't be the end all and be all, but I do think this is an area where, AI is really going to play an important role in terms of boosting this rate. Particularly, being able to triage a problem immediately and then get someone to the right solution is really a critical part of this.
100%. I'll tell you what, one last tip coming in from Grace. Involve your team in setting up KPIs. It helps with engagement and commitment. Grace, 100% agree. I also think it helps with getting them to understand exactly why these are the targets that are being set as well. When there is a little bit of back and forth there, it makes a world of difference in my experience.
Yeah, I agree because there's so many measures, right, in a call center. There is, and if the people who are part of these measures understand them, know the importance, know the value, know how they can influence them, then yeah. And we all know you can't have a good customer experience without a good employee experience, right? So the more we can do to make sure employees are happy and engaged and part of it, the better ultimately.
Especially when we talk this much about agent burnout as well and contact center churn. Honestly, this is such an easy thing that contact centers can do. If nothing else, just educate people on maybe a bit more back and forth there as well. Makes a world of difference. But Kevin, I think it's just about time to move on to your presentation here. So before we do, let me quickly release this poll talking about real-time KPIs. There we go. Audience should be seeing it now. Do you provide real-time KPIs to agents or advisors today in your contact center? Four different options here. Kevin, what do you expect to see?
I'm going to say no. I think we're going to see a lot of people saying no, but we'll be looking for this soon.
I
That would be
think
my
I would say pretty similar. There we go. So I'll tell you what, let me end the poll now and share the results. Yeah, if you're adding up the two no scores, I think you're just about right. Kevin, I think you're right. Real-time KPIs mean so many different things these days, and there's so many different KPIs that it can apply to, which again we'll get into your slide deck. Katie, some of it relates to some of the sort of shifting KPIs that you were mentioning before as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm encouraged to see that, more people say they have it than they're looking into this. That's great news.
My question as a follow-up there is to how many people are actually actioning it as
Yeah,
well, as much as it's part of the platform. They know it exists, they know they have it, and they track it. Using it the right way, I think, is so important. So, if nothing else, Kevin, that is a lovely segue into your presentation. So, if you take control, feel free to take us away.
sounds good.
Oh, sorry, I stopped sharing and it started sharing cases again.
Am I good to share?
Yeah, you're good to share. Yeah, yeah,
All right. Is everyone seeing the presentation? All right, fantastic. All right. Well, again, thank you for having me, Xander. Thank you for Call Center Helper, and thank you, Katie. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying. We there needs to be a rethinking of some of these KPIs. We get stuck in kind of the same old loops and the same old cycles without really, thinking about what's changed in the world and also about how technology is changing this. So, I kind of want to push this idea maybe a little bit further. As Xander's mentioned, and as you can see by the title of this, I'm going to be talking about agentic AI. And how it's not just going to shift KPIs, but in some cases, it's going to push us to completely rethink how we measure what matters. Some of the things that we've traditionally held on to really maybe go out the door a little bit, and there's some new metrics we need to start to consider. I really do believe we're standing on the edge of a major productivity breakthrough, and this isn't just in the contact center, but I think it's an area where it's really, you're going to see it begin and really, really push across organizations. And it's being driven by this concept of AI agents. So this is no longer chat bots, scripted bots, or basic automation. These are intelligent, autonomous systems that can not only take action, but they can adapt in real time and they continuously learn. And they're not just supporting the work in the contact center. In many cases, and again, this is still a bit early, but they're actually becoming teammates in so to sense, and really, becoming true teammates. So that means what we think about workforce productivity really needs to change, right? So efficiency metrics, is definitely going to be redefined. So over the next 15 minutes, I'll unpack a little bit of what agentic AI is. I'll show you how it's showing up today in real contact centers, and then why it's going to force a rethink of some of the ways we track, measure, and improve customer experience. All right. So, I do think before we dive into the agentic AI, it is important to understand a little bit how we got here. So, what I'm calling AI and CX 1.0. So these are your scripted conversational AI tools, your basic workflow automations. These delivered real performance gains. We started to see faster response times. We started to see more personalized interactions and better data, to inform decisions. And so it raised the floor for contact center KPIs. So, as I just mentioned, organizations saw improvements in things like average handle time and customer satisfaction. And, maybe that's why they're doubling down on things like average handle time. But it did still come with trade-offs. Getting these results requires heavy infrastructure. There's complex model training that's involved. There's a lot of iterating on, different instances and different intents. And oftentimes you needed data scientists or people with with experience in specific programming languages to really keep things up and running. So this complexity just makes it really hard to scale. So the results are there, they're impacting performance, but really difficult to scale this out. And oftentimes it could actually become a little bit of a drag on performance because it was so difficult to stay up to date, to adapt, because of the heavy infrastructure and the amount of resources we take. It could start to slow things down. There's just a lot of overhead involved with how it worked. But things really changed, I think, when Gen AI exploded onto the scene. So, we're a couple of years into this, a bit of a revolution. And, we've already seen this massive surge of adoption. Almost 40% of organizations are already in some pilot or production mode now. But what's even more telling is that Gen AI is no longer a side experiment. So what we're hearing from Gartner and other analysts is that CEOs are mandating investments now. So like CIOs are being asked to increase their Gen AI spend by as much as 75% over the next couple of years. People are seeing the value. They're seeing how it's changing, and we're experiencing it in our daily life. I use ChatGPT all the time, Perplexity, Claude. These things are becoming more commercial. They're becoming more involved, and when I interact with it, I see the benefit. I want to bring it into my organization. And where is all this investment going? It's going to customer-facing teams. So you can see by the data we're showing here that 42% of companies are prioritizing customer service. And why? Because that's where the biggest and fastest productivity gains are. They're going to be measurable, they're going to be impactful, and they're ready to scale. So this is where we're starting to see the investment. This is where we're starting to see the innovation, and this is where we're starting to see the results. But even with all this momentum, there's still something missing. And generative AI has all these incredible language capabilities, but it doesn't act on its own. It can't make decisions, it can't take initiative, and it doesn't respond to real-time data. So that's where there's this autonomy gap, and that's where agentic AI comes in. So agentic AI, it's really the next leap forward in intelligent customer experience. So unlike traditional AI models, it doesn't just respond. So it understands, it reasons, takes actions, and learns from the results. So if you can see, like, looking at the graphic that you can have here on the slide, you can see it really starts with that natural language input, whether this is voice or text from the customer, just the way they'd speak to a human, just the way you'd speak to your friends or your relatives. And then comes that interpretation and reasoning. The AI models are able to analyze the input, able to understand intent and context. That's a lot what Katie was saying. That context gets lost. And this is using technology to make sure it doesn't. And it starts to evaluate the next best steps. So it's not just pulling from a script, but it's actually reasoning. It's, being able to take in this context, understanding, that Katie's had to call in multiple times around this issue. She's upset. That's context that it can use to, start to maybe there's some things it can say or offers it can make to start to placate Katie a little bit or improve the relationship from where it went. And from there it will generate a workflow. So that plan of action to solve the issue, what I just mentioned. So maybe it provides a promotion or, it provides a different way of conversing or escalates to an agent, and then it executes it. So, it could be orchestrating across systems or, all this can happen behind the scenes. And the final step is the outcome. So resolving the issue, answering the question, or completing the task. But what's really different is that agentic AI learns, right? And so you can see that learning step here in the slide I'm showing. It adapts in real time. It gets smarter with each interaction through techniques like reinforcement learning. So this isn't requiring humans to go in and continually update and train these models. And this is what separates agentic AI from everything else that came before. So it can understand, act, and improve. And this is all without any human handholding. So it's a complete rethink of how AI can drive CX. So, each on their own are really powerful, generative AI and agentic AI, but it's when they're put together that they really unlock, this new kind of CX, one that's fully conversational driven and outcome oriented. So, generative AI is going to handle the language capabilities. It's going to craft those personalized responses. They're going to be human-like. They're going to reduce friction, improve the flow of every interaction. And agentic AI complements that, by turning that understanding into action. It makes decisions, it executes tasks, adapts in real time, learns from the outcome. So it's this closed loop: understand, act, improve. And this implies not just to customer actions, but also to agent experiences. And I think this is really critical. So the way that you're giving your teams real-time support, what we talked about in that poll, you're going to have a lot smarter tools to do this now. So the job's going to get done, going to be improved. As I mentioned, if the customer's emotion changes across a conversation, the technology is going to be able to understand that and be able to provide that information to your agent. If your agent has a question that it needs to ask, needs to find an article from your knowledge base or needs to find a piece of knowledge from there, it's just a really simple prompt. It's just a simple question. There you'll be able to use the same type of language that they use. Like, hey Xander, I need to find this article. You know where it is? They can use that type of informal conversation with their co-pilot or whatever agent assistance tool they're using. So it's really powerful. And what does this really look like in action? So it looks like an AI agent. So you've heard this term. I'm sure if you've been to any conference recently, I was just at Enterprise Connect in the States, and this is everywhere. Everyone's talking about AI agents. It's every booth is going to have a sign about agentic AI, a lot of presentations. So the AI agent, it brings together everything we've just covered. So that generative AI to understand and communicate, and the agentic component to reason, take action, and learn. So the AI agent can engage in natural conversation. So again, the way we're speaking now, it can interpret intent, understand emotion, make decisions, trigger workflows, and like I said, it improves, it reinforces that learning over time. And this is all done independently, or alongside a human when you need this, if we're talking about within a healthcare setting or maybe a highly regulated setting where, we want to make sure if we're giving financial advice through, artificial intelligence, there's some questions around that and some ethical concerns that we need to, mitigate. And this is maybe where you want to have a human step in and be part of that process. But this is definitely why we see at TalkDesk and other organizations really see these AI agents as the future of CX. They're really not just enhancing experiences; they're now driving them. And particularly with that adaptability built in. So as things change, as customers' needs change, as variables in the greater world change, we've seen what's happened in the United States with a lot of these tariffs being pushed on the world. That's going to change the way people are interacting, how they're feeling about maybe an American brand. That may change, and now there's some adaptability to how we can maybe start to make people feel a little bit better about it and not necessarily blame a company or push something on have a negative feeling and maybe disrupt loyalty. Okay, so what I'm showing here on this slide is really what this kind of multi-agent platform looks like. So like at the center is your AI agent. So this is the orchestrator. It's very goal-oriented, it's tool-aware, it's context-driven. You don't have to hard code logic or train it from scratch. You really just describe the outcome you want in very plain language, and the agent takes it from there. So you can see on the right, I have an example. And the prompt is super simple. It's human, it's conversational. The AI agent takes that high level information and then turns it into coordinated action. So whether that's pulling data from your CRM system, engaging with customers, or supporting agents, and under the hood, so to speak, or the bonnet, I guess, if we're in the UK, it can delegate these tasks to specialized sub-agents. So some may focus on customer conversations. Others are going to be focused on supporting human agents. So it's like a team of AI workers collaborating behind the scenes, and each one with a role to play, all aligned to this common goal in what I have, and that's outlined in that automation goal. So, and then you can see on the left, we have the human stakeholders, the administrators, the managers, the supervisors. They stay in control by setting the goals and guardrails. Right? And so this structure makes AI scalable, it's modular, and it's much easier to manage than your traditional rule-based system. Again, with people requiring specialized data scientists or programmers who understand, things like R and Shiny and kind of complex programming languages. Okay, so what I'm showing now is really a great snapshot, like to show just how far we've come. So on the left, we've really got the old way of doing things. So this is scripted, it's manual, it's time consuming, and despite a customer experience, in designing that customer experience meant configuring every detail by hand. So, very complex, took hours, could take days, and required constant maintenance. And because it wasn't adaptive, as I mentioned before, it can drag down performance if it's not staying up with it. It's so complex to keep up to date, it can have that negative side effects. Now, if we compare that to the right, what you're seeing with AI agents, you can build everything with plain language. So you set a goal, describe what you want to happen, and the AI figures out how to make it work. And the design process is dramatically simpler. It's faster to launch, easier to adjust, and far less taxing on your ops teams. So, and most importantly, it performs better, right? So the AI agents make smarter decisions in real time, reduces the need for human intervention, and delivers measurable improvements in metrics that we discussed, things like customer satisfaction, customer effort score, and more traditional things like first contact resolution and average handle time. And also, I do, want to push back, continue to bring up this point of productivity. It's not just the customer experience and all that productivity, it's the design time. We're seeing design time drop by as much as 90%. I mean, that's massive productivity savings. That's going to allow you to do a lot more with the operational teams, going to free them up to focus on other issues, and things that you need to change or you need to adapt, you can do much faster than you ever could before. So I've explained a lot about the capabilities, but let's talk a little bit about the impact, and a lot of this is burgeoning. This is new. So we're still trying to figure out, where this is all going to end up, but as I mentioned, these AI agents aren't just a new layer of intelligence. They're really improving KPIs that matter in the contact center. So, some of the areas where we're already seeing some of those gains, real-time agent guidance. This is going to help reduce average handle time. It's going to increase customer satisfaction and drive up first contact resolution. We're seeing smart in-the-moment support based on customer emotion and intent delivered to the agent to help them resolve those problems. Knowledge retrieval, another huge issue where we're seeing a significant impact. It's going to eliminate the lag of, trying to surface the right information. It boosts agent productivity. You're surfacing not whole articles, you're just providing exactly the information you need. And like I said, the search capabilities for agents are much simpler. And then in performance monitoring, this is another way that you can flag coaching moments automatically, you can help reduce escalations, you can identify issues before they snowball. Again, things we've talked about with AI in the past, but we're seeing huge productivity gains here, huge impact on these, not small, it's incremental changes, but we're seeing significant gains across the board here. Quality assurance is another area where, this is where we're seeing some significant impact. Some of the ability for emotional analysis is really changing this. One of our customers has automated 70% of all their QA activities now using agentic AI and generative AI. So huge savings. They used to he said they, maybe got 1 to 2% response from their surveys. But he said, I don't care about those responses. I care about the 98% who didn't respond. And now I can understand what they're thinking, how they're feeling, and now I can adjust my programs. And I don't have to put all this manual effort into it as well. So, I mean, it's just a huge win. I know more and it's taking less effort to do it. So, it's hard to ignore the results. Workforce management, another area where AI agents can really adjust staffing recommendations in real time. So, you can keep service levels high and costs in check, even when you have, demand spikes in demand, like around the holiday season. So, really be able to adjust on the fly. So this is just a few areas where, we're seeing agentic AI, you know, start to helping people and start to elevate their customer experience. We're going to see more areas of the contact center where you're going to see these type of outsized results. But, we're just getting started, and this is some places where we are seeing real measurable impact today. Now, a question I often get is, how do you get started, right? So, couple basic, tips here. The first is, look where AI agents can plug into your existing strategy. You really don't need to overhaul everything. I think you've probably heard this a lot with software, the way you're deploying software, kind of that crawl, walk, run approach. And that's really a good way to approach this as well. Identify a few high impact areas, whether it's boosting self-service, automating routing, or just improving agent support. Those are a few good places to look. And then invest in some AI literacy. It is important to understand what's going on here. This is not just a small shift. This is a major leap forward in AI technology, and understanding what the possibilities are, what it can do, is going to be really important for your team as you're strategizing. So, and definitely equip your team with the knowledge. Make sure that, as we said before, bring your agents into this. There is some fear of AI replacing people, and you want them to be comfortable that this is really augmenting and enhancing what they can do. I'm amazed by what I can do with ChatGPT and some of the capabilities in our own system. How much more productive I can be. Just using a couple tools. So bring them in so that they're not thinking about being replaced, but they can see how they can add more value. And whether it's empowering agents or improving QA, it's these AI agents that are really making all this possible, and it's really exciting. So this is kind of that path to a smarter, more scalable customer experience. And then I'll just close on a final wrap up here. These AI agents aren't coming; they are already here. They're already changing how we work and how we serve customers and how we measure success. In this kind of shift, it doesn't just improve performance, it also challenges how we define performance in the first place. So KPIs like average handle time, CSAT, as Katie mentioned, they still matter, but now we're starting to track things like AI resolution rates, AI containment, AI decision quality. These are new things that we weren't thinking about before in the contact center, but now are becoming important as we move forward. So, as you start to think about your CX strategy going forward, it's really worth asking, what should performance look like in an AI-powered world? That's definitely the direction we're heading. And, if you're, not to be scary or, you got to do this now, jump on this, but everyone's moving there. And if you're not heading down this road, you're definitely going to find yourself at a competitive disadvantage. So, all right. Well, thank you. I hope I didn't speak too long. I know I didn't leave too much left on the clock there, Xander, but appreciated the time and really excited about this topic.
No, you're good, Kevin. That was so interesting. And I think, again, it provides such an interesting side of the coin from what Katie talked about there. So I'll quickly launch our final poll is, would you like to see a demonstration for TalkDesk agentic AI solution? I think if I'm looking at it from an audience perspective, I think there's so many different bits and pieces to take from today, Kevin. But ultimately, I think you can start by looking at Katie's presentation. Look at some of the issues that you're facing as well on the left side of your slide deck, Katie. And then again, Kevin, referring back to yours as well, some of what you're doing at the moment. And again, I'm saying this whilst the product demo is on screen at the moment, purely because, again, you can start to see where other people in other verticals similar to you are having these problems as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think that's the key thing there is it's taking the first bit of Katie's presentation, putting it into Kevin, what you were showing with Agentic AI and what is possible, and then Katie, the second part of your presentation as well, where we're looking at the new KPIs. It's such a useful way of looking at that, I think.
Yeah, and I think, absolutely, we're going to be bringing in more AI centric or focused KPIs because we want to measure the performance of the tools that we're using. But I still think so strongly that ultimately, every tool, every bit of technology, any solution we use, it's for the ultimate goal of serving the customer. So we need to be focusing our measures not just on the performance of the tools and the solutions, but actually on the outcomes that they drive to the customer.
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
So I tell
couldn't
you what,
agree more.
let me end that poll there, and I'll quickly blitz through in the 5 minutes we've got left here. Let's do some quick fire Q&A. Before I do that, there is another Talk Desk webinar coming up we found about today, which is all about contact center KPIs. Kevin, this is based off reports that you guys do year on year, surveying so many different customers, so many different contact centers. So well worth checking out. I believe the link is in the description in the chat now. But very quickly, then, let's circle on to tips and questions. So I'm going to go rapid fire here, guys. So short, succinct answers, and we will get through as many as we can. This one coming in from Mark. It is interesting that that as we talk about lack of empathy. Oh, I've realised this now. Mark, we did answer that as part of Kevin's thing. There's so many different things when we're talking about sentiment analysis as well. And it's, at least Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But ultimately, from what I've seen contact centers doing when it comes to AI and empathy, it's about detecting when there is a need for a human touch. And again, the escalation process to go to a live agent where possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And and I think that's a big part of what the Gen AI does is to be able to match that type of, the emotion of the customer. I think that's critical. So they understand if, they can detect if they're frustrated and then match that emotion. And I think what Katie was saying about the TED Talk with Sam Altman is just really fascinating. And I've seen a lot of studies in the United States around doctors and their bedside manner versus AI. And, continually AI is rated as more empathetic than your typical family doctor or physician. So, I do think maybe it's looking at some of that research, doing some thoughts on there. If there's a concern about bringing to the organization that it won't be empathetic, I think there's a bevy of research out there that really does support that it actually might be more empathetic than humans. So,
If
which is
nothing
a little
else,
counterintuitive, but
it's easier to read the handwriting on OpenAI than my doctor's, so that's fine. That's, if nothing else, progress in some way. Here's a tip coming in from Daniel. I'm going to quickly blitz through as many tips as possible here as we round out the hour. The measures are for leaders to manage the business. The real value to building behaviors that drive the desired outcomes and meet the KPI expectations naturally, like the osmosis effect, comes down to coaching variation out of the process by targeting specific areas. Daniel, I think that's 100% right. Katie, you and I have talked about this at length before, but it's about understanding your people. And again, it comes back to empathy to a certain extent. And again, engendering those right behaviors in them.
Culture, culture, culture. Yeah.
100%. Right, next tip coming in from Natasha. Empower agents and all contact center players with knowledge training of the necessary AI tools before implementing this. Often mindset changes are the key for any new shift in any organization. Kevin, you and I have discussed this as well before. I agree completely.
Yeah, and I think we've seen this before. I mean, this is obviously a new tool, it's new technology, but we've seen new technology come in and fear of replacement or fear of how do I use this appropriately? And, I think leaning on some of those learnings that we've had in the past is important.
Yeah, and I think it's not a one size fits all situation as well, right? I'm not sure it's in this slide deck, but for the sake of time, I'll quickly just read it directly off the chat. and coming in by saying she works for an addiction and mental health services contact center, see the value in AI for contact center auditing, perhaps some self-service options rather than purely replacing agents there. I think it's that's right. It's not just this is the one glove that fits everything. No, it's specific to your contact center. You all have your own problems, you all have your own pain points, and it's about figuring out the right solution for your issues.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, this is probably a conversation for another webinar, and obviously we're at the top of the hour here. But I think we need to rethink about the role of the contact center agent as well, how it engages with these bots. Is it managing, the number of AI agents? How does it do? How does a contact center, human agent do that? What does their job become? So there's a lot to be explored here.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what then, as we've hit the top of the hour, I'll quickly wrap up here. So, what do you like best about the webinar? As always, we do like to improve on these every time we do them. So, please do, in one or two words in the chat, let us know what you like today. And then, as always, let's do the winning tip. So, coming in from Jimmy, thank you again for my team for picking a long one when I'm trying to go fast and not mess up my speech. Minimize or remove KPIs altogether. Most are designed for the business and not the customer experience. In my current role, I removed all but two. Advisors have had unnecessary pressure removed, allowing them to focus on the best customer experience we can. Performance is constantly high and discussed weekly, but more importantly, customer satisfaction is around 95% consistently, and advisors are empowered and trusted. Jimmy, thank you so much for that. I think it's an interesting one, to be fair, because it's one of those things that comes back to some of the questions and tips we had earlier, right? It's about knowing your team. And Katie, like you said, culture. It's
Yeah.
less about removing KPIs altogether in my mind. It's about picking the right KPIs for your team, involving them in the process, and getting them to understand exactly why they're being tasked on these.
Yeah, Jimmy is a change maker, right? And I think it's great what he's doing because, as I said right at the beginning, there is no other industry that measures as much as call centers do. That isn't to say you have to stop measuring, but I think that is food for thought.
Kevin, anything final words on that one?
No, I really like it. I mean, I wouldn't say I would remove KPIs altogether. I'm a bit of a data wonk, so I wouldn't want to see them gone. But I do agree with minimizing. I think, you can measure, as we saw in the first poll, there's a lot of things that are measured just for the sake of measuring them that don't really add value. And that can add pressure to your team, to your agents. Really focusing on the few that matters. I mean, you can see here that Jimmy isn't, customer satisfaction is important to him. So maybe it's just that holy grail, and you're tracking that, and that's what's most important. I think it's great advice.
Yeah, maybe that's it, right? It's taking away a million different targets and boiling it down to just two core ones that has other elements that filter into there that make up the overall score. But it's a far more digestible way for not only contact center leaders, but agents as well, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, there we go. That is us more or less finished for the day. But you will, as always, get a little survey at the end of this. 3 questions long. Please do fill it out. It makes it so much easier from our side as call center helper to make sure we're doing the right things with these webinars. Replay and slides will be available later this afternoon. We have 3 webinars coming up on all different kinds of contact center things. We have strategies to maximize contact center performance on the 1st of May. 5th of June, we've got tips for optimizing WFM, always a fun topic. And then July 3rd, we have customer feedback tactics you can't overlook. So please do get involved. You can register to do so both in the link in the chat now or alternatively on your screen here. So all that is left for me to do today before I sit down is thank our speakers. Katie, thank you so much for joining us and again sharing all those tips.
Thank you so much. It was great. Really, really good session. Love the chat.
Oh, 100%. And again, if nothing else, we've got the recording of you doing your contact center story, which is always useful. And Kevin, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on agentic AI, but again, how that relates to call centers at the moment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate being here and really enjoyed your presentation, Katie. And maybe it'll be a nice bedtime story for my kids.
Guys, thank you so much. And again, above all, thank you so much in the audience for joining us today. We couldn't do this without you. So your participation, both in tips and questions, as well as just turning up to these things, makes a world of difference. So hopefully you've got some really insightful insights to take away. But that's a lovely little endpoint. Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.